The agreement was simple. 3 nights, no names, no future contact. She kept her end. He did not keep his. Not because he broke the rules, but because he had written himself into her world before she ever knocked on the door of room 702. Her tuition, her scholarship reinstatement, her lecture hall, all of it already arranged. And in the morning, she finally sat across from him in an empty seminar room and asked him why. His answer was the last thing she expected from a mafia lord. It was the truth. Before we start, I need you to do one thing. Look at the subscribe button. Now press it. Because by the time this story ends, you will either be crying, laughing, or screaming at your screen. And you will want to be here for every single part. Let's go. The letter was only 1 page long. 1 page. Printed on white paper, with the university's blue logo at the top. And in the middle of it, the most devastating sentence Zuri Brownson had read in her entire 24 years on this earth. Due to outstanding tuition fees of 11 million Korean won, your scholarship status has been flagged for review. If payment is not received within 14 days, your enrollment will be suspended pending investigation. Zuri read it 3 times. Then she put it face down on the desk. Then she picked it up again and read it a 4th time, as if the words might have changed while it was flipped. They had not changed. Her scholarship, the one she had fought 3 years to keep, the one that her mother had told every neighbor in Abuja about, the one that was supposed to be her way forward, was about to disappear over a gap she did not even fully understand. Here is what nobody tells you about scholarship fine print. There are maintenance fees, there are administrative deductions. There is a clause about your housing subsidy, another one about your department transfer. And somewhere buried at the bottom of page 11 of a document nobody actually reads, there is a section that explains how a student can do everything right and still end up owing money. Zuri had done everything right. She had a 3.9 grade average. She had submitted every paper before the deadline. She had presented at 2 international finance seminars. She had not gone to a single party in 18 months, not one. While her course mates were taking photos at Hongdae on Friday nights, she was in the library reading IMF reports for fun. And now this. Her phone buzzed. She already knew who it was. Zuri, I sent you a voice note. Did you listen? Your aunt is asking about your graduation date. She wants to start planning. You know how she is. Call me when you can, my love. We are praying. She put the phone face down next to the letter. Her mother did not know about the gap. Her mother thought everything was going perfectly. Her mother had a voice note saved on her phone of Zuri speaking Korean for the first time, and she played it for guests at every gathering. She did not know that her daughter was currently sitting in a small apartment in Seoul, reading a suspension letter, doing the kind of mental arithmetic that ends in no good answer. 11 million won. That was roughly $8,000 in 14 days. Zuri had 240,000 won in her account. She had checked that morning. She went to the bank the next morning anyway. She dressed well. She spoke clearly. She brought her scholarship documents and her enrollment letter and a 2-page financial summary she had typed herself because she believed in preparation. The loan officer looked at her documents, looked at her documents again, and then said, with the gentleness of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis, "We require a local guarantor for student emergency loans. Do you have a Korean resident who can co-sign?" She did not have a Korean resident who could co-sign. She sat in a coffee shop after and stared at her phone for 40 minutes. She could call her mother. She could not call her mother. She could ask her church group back home for an emergency collection. She could not do that to her mother. She had already taken her savings. There was nobody else to ask. 13 days left. Yemi found her on a Tuesday. Yemi was the kind of girl who always knew somebody. She was a Nigerian student too, doing her master's in international business, and she had a talent for finding solutions that the university handbook would describe as creative. "So," Yemi said, sitting across from Zuri in the library and lowering her voice like she was about to reveal a state secret, "I have something to tell you, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you say no." "I haven't said no yet. You will want to. But wait." Zuri waited. Yemi explained it the way she explained everything, like she was describing something perfectly normal that just happened to sound unusual from a certain angle. There was a private arrangement. A wealthy man, identity undisclosed, staying at a 5-star hotel near Gangnam. He was looking for a specific kind of company for 3 nights. Educated, articulate, someone who could hold a real conversation, not cheap entertainment, more like, as Yemi put it, premium private hosting. The fee is 12 million won, paid up front before the first night. Zuri did not move. "No names exchanged," Yemi continued. "No personal history. No future contact after night 3. You go, you talk, you leave. A driver picks you up and drops you back. All you have to do is be yourself. Which, Zuri, is the one thing you are extremely good at." Silence. "Who arranged this?" Zuri asked. "An agent. Professional. This is not the first time this kind of arrangement has been made." "And you know other girls who have done this?" Yemi looked away and back. "One. She said he was polite. She said they mostly talked." "Mostly," Zuri repeated. "Entirely. I said mostly because she said mostly. I think she was being modest." Zuri looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she opened her laptop, pulled up a new document, and said, "Okay. Before I decide, I have questions. And I want real answers." Yemi blinked. "You're taking notes?" "I take notes about everything, Yemi. 12 million won is a life decision. I will not be making it based on a verbal summary in a library." This was who Zuri was. Even in the worst moment of her financial life, she opened a spreadsheet. She asked 7 questions. She wanted the name of the hotel and the room number. She wanted the payment structure confirmed in writing before she set foot anywhere. She wanted to know the exit terms, what happened if she chose to leave early, what the arrangement covered, and what it explicitly did not cover. By the time she was done, Yemi was staring at her like she had walked into a university seminar when she was expecting drama. "You know," Yemi said slowly, "most people would have just said yes or no. Most people are not the ones with 11 million won of tuition debt." She got the answer she needed. 2 days later, with confirmation in her inbox and 12 million won already moving toward her account, Zuri stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment and gave herself a very honest conversation. She was not naive. She was not desperate in the way people use that word to dismiss someone. She had looked at every door, found them all locked. This one was open. She had asked the questions. She had read the terms. She had decided with her eyes completely open. That was different from having no choice. She had a choice. She was simply choosing. She put on her best dress, the navy one she had bought for the International Finance Conference, and she took a taxi to the Grand Sarin Hotel. Wait. She just walked into that hotel. Do you think he is who she expects? Drop a comment right now. What do you think this man looks like? I want to see your guesses before we go in. Go. Room 702 was on the 7th floor, which seemed obvious. But the elevator ride took long enough that Zuri had time to reconsider her decision twice, talk herself back into it once, and lose the second argument with herself entirely. She knocked anyway. What she expected. Someone who answered immediately. Someone who had been waiting. Someone with a specific kind of energy that said this was a transaction, and both people knew it. What happened? Nobody answered for a full 15 seconds. She was raising her hand to knock again when the door opened. The man standing in the doorway was holding a book. Not a phone, not a drink. A book, with his finger marking his page, like she had interrupted something he actually wanted to finish. He was tall. Lean, but not in a way that suggested effort, more like someone who simply moved through the world, taking up exactly the space he needed and not 1 inch more. His hair was dark, slightly pushed back. His face was the kind of face that did not immediately tell you his age, and Zuri, who was good at reading people, found herself calculating and coming up empty. He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he stepped back and said, "Come in. I just need one more paragraph." She stepped inside. The suite was large and quiet. Not dramatic quiet, not look at all my wealth quiet, just genuinely still in the way that very expensive rooms sometimes are. There was a low light on near the armchair where he clearly had been sitting. There was tea on the table, 1 cup, already poured. There was a second cup, empty. He sat back down, read his paragraph, closed the book with the kind of careful respect people usually reserve for very old things or very valuable ones. And then he looked up at her properly. "Tea," he said. "Yes," she said, mostly because she could not think of a reason to say no. He poured. He did not ask how she took it, which irritated her slightly. But then she noticed he had poured it correctly anyway. Not too strong, with the amount of space that said he expected she might want to adjust it herself. She sat across from him. The arrangement terms had not specified seating. He looked at her the way someone looks at a problem they find genuinely interesting. Not invasive, not impolite, just focused, in the way that made you feel like the most important thing in the room, which, she immediately decided, was a dangerous way to feel. "You're studying finance," he said. She went still. "How did you know that?" "The agent mentioned it." That was a reasonable answer. She told herself it was a reasonable answer. "Global finance," she said. "Master's program." "What's your dissertation on?" She had not expected that. She had expected small talk, or no talk at all, or the kind of conversation that wasn't really conversation. Not a direct question about her academic work. Capital flight from sub-Saharan African economies. Specifically, how informal financial networks sustain economic activity in markets that formal institutions have abandoned. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Which markets are you focusing on?" "Nigeria, Ghana, Ethiopia. And I'm trying to include a comparison chapter on Southeast Asia. But my supervisor thinks it's too ambitious." "Your supervisor is wrong," he said simply. Zuri looked at him. Nobody had ever said that to her before. Every advisor she had spoken to had given her a variation of, "Maybe narrow it down." This man, who she did not know, in a hotel room, had just told her supervisor was wrong, like it was a fact he had verified personally. "You know something about this topic?" she asked. A pause, small, controlled. "A little," he said. They talked for 2 hours. She did not notice the time until she looked at her phone and felt a small shock move through her. 2 hours? About capital flows, debt structuring, and the IMF's approach to African sovereign loans. He had opinions, informed ones. He did not perform knowledge the way wealthy men sometimes do, dropping terms to impress. He used it cleanly, like a tool. At some point, a hotel staff member knocked to ask if they needed anything. The man said 3 words in Korean. The staff member bowed, apologized, and left. It was not the bow that stayed with Zuri. It was the apology. Staff at 5-star hotels did not apologize for doing their jobs. They apologized when they had done something wrong, or when the person they were speaking to was the kind of person who could make consequences happen. She filed that away and said nothing. When she left that night, she sat in the back of the car the arrangement had provided, and she thought about everything that had happened. Or rather, everything that had not happened. They had talked. He had been polite and careful and unusually sharp. He had not been what she expected. And that was the problem. When something is not what you expect, it means you did not have the full picture. And Zuri did not like incomplete pictures. The next afternoon, Zuri did what any reasonable graduate student would do. She researched. She searched the Grand Sarin Hotel. It was privately owned, which was unusual for a property of that scale in Gangnam. The ownership chain went through 3 holding companies before disappearing into a corporate structure she could not untangle from public records alone. The hotel had been renovated twice in 8 years. The 7th floor, according to 2 travel forums she found, was never listed on booking sites. The 7th floor was not for guests. She sat with that for a moment. She went back that night. He answered the door faster this time. No book. He was in different clothes, dark, simple, like someone who had decided to stop performing comfort and had moved straight into it. He looked at her, and then, very quietly, he almost smiled. You researched the hotel? Not a question. The ownership structure is unusual, she said, walking past him into the suite. Yes, he agreed. The 7th floor is not for regular guests, she said. Also, yes, he said. Are you going to tell me what it is for? He poured her tea without asking. Not tonight, he said, but I appreciate that you asked directly. She decided that was the most interesting non-answer she had ever received. The conversation that night went deeper. He wanted to know about Nigeria's debt relationship with China. She told him what the data said, and then she told him what the data wasn't saying, which was more interesting. He listened like someone who already knew half of it and was waiting to see if she would arrive at the other half herself. She did. At 9:47, his phone rang. He glanced at it and held up one finger. Then he stepped to the far end of the suite and spoke in Korean, quietly, for about 90 seconds. Zuri did not speak Korean fluently. She had been studying it for 2 years, which was enough to pass her university language requirement and enough to order food and navigate the subway and enough to catch, very clearly, 2 words from that phone call. Saembyong, which could mean a few things, but in context meant something closer to a serious threat, and Cheori Hai, which meant handle it. He came back to the table. If he had said anything heavy, his face did not report it. He sat down and said, You were saying something about the Lagos-Abuja corridor investment gap. I was, she said carefully. She continued. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a very quiet alarm had started. Not the panicking kind, the careful kind. The kind that said, You are sitting across from someone who says handle it and does not explain to whom, and you should factor that into your understanding of this room. When she left that night, she noticed something she had not caught before. At the end of the corridor, near the elevator, a man was sitting in a chair reading a newspaper. He had been there the first night, too. She remembered him now. The same chair, the same stillness. Nobody sat in hotel corridors reading newspapers at 10 at night. Nobody except security. The third night, Zuri arrived with a question she had decided she would ask before she left. She had been thinking about it all day. He was not a man who had simply booked a hotel room. He was a man who used a floor of a hotel that did not exist on public booking sites. He had security in the corridor. He spoke about informal capital networks like someone who had operated inside them, not studied them. And every time she asked a direct question, he gave her a technically true answer that somehow contained no actual information. That was a skill, a very specific skill, and it was not taught in business school. When she walked in, he was standing at the window, not looking at his phone or reading, just standing with his hands in his pockets, looking at the city below. She sat down. "Last night," she said. "What was the call about?" He turned from the window. He looked at her with that same unhurried focus. "A business matter," he said. "I speak Korean," she said. "Not perfectly, but enough." A pause, longer than the others. "You did not mention that," he said. "You did not ask. Most people assume I don't." He came and sat across from her. He looked at her differently now. Not harder. Actually, more openly, which was more unsettling than harder would have been. "My business has parts that are visible and parts that are not," he said. "Last night was about one of the parts that is not." "Is it dangerous?" "For most people, no. For a small number of people, yes." "For me?" "Not in this room," he said, which was not an answer to the question she asked. They sat with that for a moment. The city hummed outside. The room was warm and quiet in the way it always was. Then he said, "Your dissertation argument is right. The comparison chapter is the strongest part. Your supervisor is protecting the committee from discomfort. That's not the same as him being correct." She looked at him. "How would you know that? You haven't read it." "I know the field," he said. "I know the people who resist certain kinds of economic arguments because accepting them requires acknowledging where money actually comes from. Your topic does that. And the people who grade dissertations often have careers built on the version of economics that yours complicates." She stared at him. "You just described the exact reason my supervisor keeps asking me to soften my third chapter." "I know." "How do you know that? That's extremely specific." He picked up his tea. "I know a great many things about a great many subjects. That is what happens when you pay attention for a long time." She wanted to push. She wanted to ask him how long exactly, and in what capacity he had been paying attention, and specifically what he had been paying attention to. But the 3 nights were almost over, and she had agreed to the terms. And she was not the kind of person who renegotiated agreements after accepting them. So she filed the questions away. She had a long mental folder of things she could not act on yet, and that conversation went into it. When she stood to leave, he stood too. That was the one thing he always did. Every time she stood to go, he stood as well, not blocking her, just standing the way someone does when they have been raised to stand when a person leaves a room. "The arrangement ends tonight," she said at the door. "Yes," he said. "I will not contact you again. You will not contact me?" "Those were the terms," he agreed. She looked at him one last time. "I hope your business, the part that is not visible, resolves itself without anyone getting hurt." Something moved behind his eyes. "Thank you," he said very quietly. "That's the first time anyone has said that." She left. In the elevator going down, she breathed in slowly and let it out. It was done. She had 3 nights of her life that nobody would ever know about. And she had tuition money, and she had a stack of unanswered questions she was going to lock in a drawer and never open. That was the plan. At 6:17 the next morning, her phone buzzed. The university finance portal. Her tuition balance, 0. Paid in full. Time stamped 11:14 the previous night. 14 minutes after she had walked out of room 702. She stood in her kitchen, holding her phone for a very long time. He had paid it before she even got home. Not in the morning, not the next day. The moment she left. Like he had already decided the outcome before the night began. She set the phone down and told herself to stop thinking about it. She had a lecture at 9. She had a dissertation chapter to revise. She had a future to build, and she was going to build it starting this morning. The morning of the lecture, she was almost late. Her alarm had gone off at 7, and she had silenced it and fallen back asleep, which never happened, which meant the 3 nights had taken more out of her than she admitted. She ran through her morning routine in 12 minutes, grabbed her bag, and power-walked the 4 blocks to the university without looking at her phone. The economics department had a new visiting lecturer this semester. She had seen the email about it 2 weeks ago and had not paid much attention because she had been deep in the tuition crisis, and the world outside of that problem had gone blurry. She slipped into the lecture hall at exactly 9:03. The room was already half full. She took a seat near the middle, pulled out her notebook, and looked up at the front of the room. And her heart stopped. Not metaphorically. It stopped for 1 full second, and then kicked back in like an engine that had almost stalled. The man at the front of the room was writing something on the board. His back was to the class. He was tall. He had dark hair, slightly pushed back. He turned around. It was him. Room 702. The man with the book and the tea and the phone call and the security in the corridor. Standing at the front of her lecture hall. Not as a guest, not passing through. Standing there with chalk in his hand and the class's attention, and the kind of posture that said he had been standing in front of rooms his whole life. His eyes moved across the room in the standard sweep of a lecturer taking attendance. They landed on her. She did not move. She did not look away. She sat in her seat like her spine had fused to the back of the chair. He looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then he looked at the next student. And then he said, in the same calm, measured voice she had heard for 3 nights in a hotel suite, "Good morning. I am Professor Cha Min-jun. This semester we will be looking at the intersection of informal economic systems and global capital structure. I expect you have questions. So do I." Zuri looked down at her blank notebook page. Her pen was in her hand. She had not written a single word. The man from room 702 was her professor, and from the way he had looked at her for exactly 1 second and moved on, she understood 2 things with complete clarity. He had known she would be in this room, and he had already decided not to react, which meant he had prepared for this moment, which meant, with a cold certainty that moved through her slowly, that nothing about the last 3 nights had been accidental. Nothing at all. Professor Cha knows things about Zuri that she has not told him, and Seoul's underworld is about to walk right into her lecture hall. If you are watching this for the first time and you are not subscribed yet, do it now. She sat through 1 hour and 22 minutes of that lecture. She wrote down everything he said. Every figure, every argument, every framework. Her handwriting, normally tight and neat, came out slightly larger than usual, the way it does when your body is burning energy on something your brain is pretending not to notice. He was good. That was the most irritating thing about the whole situation. He was genuinely, frustratingly good at this. He taught the way someone teaches when they have actually done the thing they are describing, not read about it, not studied it from a comfortable distance, but lived inside it. When he explained how shadow economies function inside collapsed formal systems, he did not sound like a textbook. He sounded like a witness. A student 2 rows ahead raised her hand. Professor Cha, do you think informal financial networks are inherently destabilizing, or can they be a sign of economic resilience? He was quiet for 2 seconds. The kind of quiet that meant he was giving the question real thought, not performing patience. Both things can be true at the same time, he said. Resilience and risk are not opposites. Sometimes the system that keeps people alive is also the system that keeps the problem alive. That is not a reason to dismantle it. It is a reason to understand it before you touch it. Zuri's pen stopped moving. That was almost word for word the argument she had been building in Chapter 3, the one her supervisor kept asking her to soften. She looked up from her notebook. He was not looking at her. He was writing something on the board. She looked back down, but she had heard it. And she suspected, with a quiet fury she did not have the energy to fully unpack right now, that he had meant her to hear it. When the lecture ended, students moved toward the front with questions and introductions. She moved toward the door. His voice reached her before she got there. Not raised, not calling after her. Just placed, very precisely, in the space between her and the exit. Miss Brownson. She stopped. The students around her did not seem to notice. She turned. He was still at the front, answering another student's question. He had not even looked up. He had simply said her name, correctly pronounced, into the room, and trusted that she would stop. He had been right. She waited. Students filtered out. He finished with the last student, who thanked him twice and left looking very pleased. Then he walked to the lectern, picked up a single sheet of paper, and held it out toward her without looking up from whatever he was reading on it. She walked forward and took it. It was the module reading list, with one title circled: Informal Capital Flows in Post-Colonial Economies, by a researcher named Park Ji-woo. Relevant to your comparison chapter, he said, still not looking at her. The library has it. 3rd shelf, west wing. You don't know what my comparison chapter is about, she said. Now he looked at her. You told me about it for 3 hours across 2 nights. I have a fairly good idea. He said it like a professor discussing a student's work. Just that. Academic, clean, completely appropriate for the room they were standing in. She took the reading list. Thank you, Professor. You're welcome, Miss Brownson. She left. Outside in the corridor, she exhaled once, long and slow, and then she turned the sheet of paper over in her hands. On the back, in small, neat handwriting, were 3 more titles she had never seen cited before. Research papers, obscure ones, the kind you only find if you know exactly where to look. All of them directly relevant to her 3rd chapter. He had prepared those before the lecture, which meant he had known she would be in that class, which meant he had looked her up. Or worse, he had already known. Zuri folded the paper and put it in her bag. She walked to her next class. She sat in her seat. She opened her notebook. And she thought, with the kind of focus she usually reserved for financial models, about exactly what kind of trouble she was sitting inside. She decided on a strategy that same evening. The strategy was, act like nothing had happened. Not in the way that meant pretending to herself, she was too honest for that, but in the way that meant she would attend his lectures, take his notes, read his recommended texts, and treat him with the same professional respect she would give any other professor. Because the alternative was to withdraw from the module. And the module she had already checked, was the most relevant course she could take for her dissertation this semester. Withdrawing from it would hurt her academically. Staying in it would require a level of composure she was going to have to build from scratch. She had built harder things from scratch. For 2 weeks, the strategy worked. She attended every lecture. She answered questions when called on. She did not raise her hand unnecessarily. She did not seek him out during office hours. She read every text on the list, including the 3 on the back of the sheet, which were exactly as relevant as he had promised, and probably the reason her 3rd chapter was now the strongest part of her draft. He, for his part, taught. He never singled her out. He never made a comment that could be read 2 ways. He was, by every visible measure, simply a professor doing his job with unusual competence. But on the 3rd Thursday of the semester, Zuri noticed something. She had a question about his lecture that week. A genuine academic question about a methodology gap she had spotted in one of the papers he had assigned. She spent 40 minutes in the library trying to resolve it herself before accepting that she needed to ask him. She went to his office at 4 in the afternoon, during the posted hours. His door was open. He was not there. She waited for 10 minutes, then sat down on the bench outside and opened her laptop to keep working while she waited. He arrived 15 minutes later. He was in his coat. He had been outside. The coat was the kind of dark coat that did not look like a professor's coat. It looked like something a person wears when they are moving through a city and do not want to be noticed. He had it unbuttoned, and he was looking at his phone as he walked. When he saw her sitting outside his office, he did not look surprised. He looked, for the briefest moment, like something in him settled, like the way a door looks when it finally closes properly. Then the expression was gone, and he was just a professor arriving for office hours. "Miss Brownson, come in." His office was sparse. Most professors' offices looked like a filing system had lost a fight with gravity, papers and books everywhere. 3 half-empty mugs on the desk, a child's drawing pinned to the wall from some years ago. His office had a desk, a lamp, 4 bookshelves with books arranged by size, and nothing personal. No photographs, no keepsakes. Not a single thing that said, "This is who I am when I am not working." She asked her question, the methodology gap in the Park Ji-woo paper, specifically in how it measured informal capital velocity. He answered it in 4 sentences. Then he paused. "Your instinct is right. The paper's measurement approach has a blind spot. Most reviewers missed it. But not you," she said before she could stop herself. A beat. "No, not me." She stood to leave. "You haven't been to office hours before," he said. "I don't usually need to come. I know. Your coursework is consistently the best in the cohort." She stopped at the door. "Professor, are you giving me a compliment or collecting data?" He actually paused on that. Genuinely paused, like the question had landed in a place he was not expecting. "Both," he said. She left. That was honestly the funniest and most alarming answer he had given her yet. The problem was that it was also the most honest. The rumor about Professor Cha reached her on a Tuesday. She heard it the way you hear things in a university, not directly, not cleanly, but through the peculiar university version of telephone, where one person says something near a coffee machine, and by 3 that afternoon, 4 different people have told you the same story, with 4 different details. A student in the economics department had seen Professor Cha getting into a car near the university's east gate. Not a taxi, not a regular car. A black vehicle with no plates visible and a driver who got out and held the door. Another student had noticed he sometimes canceled his Friday seminars with less than an hour's notice, which he always rescheduled perfectly but never explained. A third student a Korean student who had grown up in Gangnam, said simply, "I have seen that car before. That style of car. It belongs to a particular kind of person in this city, not a professor kind of person." When someone asked what kind of person, the student shrugged in a way that was less casual than it looked and changed the subject. Zuri listened to all of this. She did not contribute to it. She ate her lunch and nodded in the appropriate places and felt a very specific kind of cold move through her. The kind that comes not from hearing new information, but from having old suspicions confirmed by someone who does not know they are confirming them. She went home that evening and opened her laptop. She searched Cha Min-jun, Economics, Seoul. His academic profile came up first. Published in 4 journals. Guest lecturer record at 3 Asian universities over the past decade. 1 peer-reviewed paper on informal financial systems in East Asia that had been cited over 200 times. Clean, respectable, professional. She went deeper. Past the academic results, past the conference listings, past a brief mention in a Korean financial journal from 3 years ago. Nothing damaging, nothing obvious. But also, nothing that explained a man of 40 with that level of knowledge and that kind of car. She searched the 3 holding companies connected to the hotel, the trail that had stopped at the Grand Saren's ownership structure. She ran it again, this time cross-referencing 2 of the company names with business registration databases she had accessed before for her dissertation research. One name came up twice. Park Group, Holdings, in the hotel structure and in a small import business registered in Incheon. She cross-referenced Park Group Holdings with a list of Seoul-based corporate fronts that had been flagged in a 2-year-old academic paper on organized crime financing in Korea. The paper did not use names. It used categories and codes. But the category for Park Group Holdings was listed as Tier 1 capital structure, non-state, high integration, significant exposure to political and enforcement sectors. She sat back in her chair. In plain language, that meant an organization big enough to have politicians in its pocket and police looking the other way. She closed her laptop. Then she opened it again. Because she was a finance student who had written a dissertation chapter on exactly this kind of structure. And finance students know that finding the connection is only the beginning. The real question is always, what does this structure do? Who does it protect? And what happens to people who sit too close to it? She thought about a man sitting in a hotel chair reading a book. She thought about the word handle it. She thought about how he had paid her tuition in 14 minutes. She thought about all of it. And then she thought about one more thing. Her scholarship had been on the verge of cancellation. It had been reinstated after the tuition was paid. But a scholarship reinstatement was not just about money. It required a review. A review required someone in the scholarship's office to look at her file and make a decision. That process normally took 4 to 6 weeks. Hers had been reinstated in 48 hours. Do you see what she's seeing right now? Comment, "I see it," if you have already worked it out. Because Zuri is about to ask a question that is going to change everything. And I want to know who is ahead of her. The next morning, Zuri walked into the university's scholarship office. She was polite. She was calm. She told the woman at the desk that she wanted to understand the process for her reinstatement, for her own records. She had a student's right to see documentation related to her file. The woman at the desk printed her a summary. The reinstatement had been triggered by a directive from the Faculty of Economics, specifically from the office of the newly appointed visiting lecturer. It cited, and she read this 3 times, exceptional academic merit warranting emergency review. Not the tuition payment. That had cleared the financial block. But the scholarship reinstatement, the one that actually secured her future in the program, had been pushed through by someone in the economics faculty. By him, before he had even met her in that lecture hall. Zuri stood outside the scholarship office in the corridor and looked at the paper in her hands. Her scholarship had not been saved by coincidence. It had been saved deliberately by a man who had been watching her file, who had been watching her before she ever walked into room 702. The arrangement had not been random. She had not been chosen because she was available. She had been chosen because he had already decided she was someone worth choosing. And that changed everything about the last 3 weeks. It reframed every conversation, every careful answer, every book recommendation, and every quietly brilliant lecture. She folded the paper. She put it in her bag. She went to find him. He was in a seminar room, alone, setting up for an afternoon session. She closed the door behind her. He looked up. She put the scholarship paper on the table between them. "You did this." He looked at it, looked at her. Yes. Not a hesitation, not a performance of innocence. Just yes, like a man who had decided that lying to her was not something he was going to do. Before we met in that room, yes. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Because her legs were considering not doing their job, and she was not going to let him see that. "How long had you been watching me?" He sat down too. The table between them was wide enough that it felt like a negotiating table, which was probably the right frame for this conversation. "Your dissertation abstract was published on the faculty research board 4 months ago," he said. "It was unusually good. The kind of argument that people with real field knowledge arrive at, not students. I asked about you. You asked about me. Your academic record, your background, yes. And when you found out I was about to lose my scholarship?" A very short pause. "I made sure that didn't happen by arranging 3 nights in a hotel room. The arrangement was your choice," he said. "I made it available. You evaluated it, negotiated terms, and decided. I did not push you. I would not have. That is the most technically precise manipulation I have ever heard described," she said. He did not flinch. "You're right. That's a fair description." She stared at him. "You're agreeing with me?" "I'm not going to argue with a correct assessment. Most people argue with correct assessments. Most people are wrong." She almost laughed. She caught it. "Why? Why me? Why go through all of this instead of just, I don't know, introducing yourself professionally?" He was quiet for a moment that felt considered. "I wanted to know if you were who you appeared to be on paper. Academic records describe a student. They don't describe a person. I needed to know the person." "For what purpose?" He looked at her steadily. "I'm not ready to answer that yet." "That is not good enough." "No, it's not. I know that." He said it without defensiveness, like a person who had thought about this already and decided honesty about his limitations was better than a lie that worked for today. "I will answer it. Not today." She stood. She picked up the scholarship paper. She looked at him one last time. "I have 2 options," she said. "I can report this to the faculty, which ends my scholarship anyway because the reinstatement was tied to your influence and ends your appointment at this university. Or I can do nothing and stay and wait for the answer you say you're not ready to give." He said nothing. "I'm going to my next class," she said. "And you are going to remember that I know exactly what I am choosing and why, and that choosing to stay does not make me yours." She walked out. Behind her, she heard absolutely nothing. No chair moving, no phone picking up, no shift in the air. Just a man sitting in a seminar room, being looked at clearly for possibly the first time in a very long time. 3 days later, a man introduced himself as a journalist. He was waiting near the campus cafe. He had one of those faces that was designed to look trustworthy. Open eyes, approachable posture, the kind of careful casual that people practice. He said his name was Kwon Seong-min. He said he was writing a story about the university's new visiting faculty. "I'm not a source," Zuri said, before he got to his second sentence. "I'm not asking you to be a source," he said pleasantly. "I just have one question. Do you know Professor Cha from outside the university?" She looked at him. She took the full 3 seconds. She cataloged the way he stood, the quality of his shoes, the phone in his left hand, where the screen had something open that was not a notes app. "No," she said. "You've never met him at the Grand Sarin Hotel?" Her body did not react. She had been running numbers in high-pressure situations since she was 19 years old. Her face was her least betraying feature. "I think you have the wrong person," she said. "Have a good afternoon." She walked away without hurrying. Hurrying tells a story. She had learned that from watching people in Lagos markets who were late for something and did not want anyone to know. She did not go back to her apartment. She went to the library and sat at a desk facing the entrance, and she thought. He had known she was at the hotel. He had used the room number. He had said hotel. A journalist writing about visiting faculty would not have that information unless someone had given it to him specifically. This was not a journalism visit. This was a message. The question was, a message from whom? And a message saying what? She did not tell Min Jun. Not that evening, not the next day. She needed to think first. But on the second evening, she checked the name Kwon Seong-min against a Korean press database she had accessed before for a research paper. Kwon Seong-min had no bylines, no published articles, no press credentials she could find in any database. His name appeared once in a business registration that had been dissolved 2 years ago, linked to a logistics company in Incheon, where the import business linked to Park Group Holdings was registered. She closed the laptop. She was not a journalist's target. She was someone else's target. And the someone else had not come to threaten her. Not yet. They had come to see how she would react when she was poked. They had poked her. She had not moved. She hoped that was the right answer. But she was not certain. And for a girl who liked to be certain, that was the most uncomfortable place to stand. She told him on a Friday morning. She did not go to his office. She went to the seminar room where she knew he had set up early, because she had noticed the pattern over 3 weeks without meaning to, and waited by the door. When he arrived, she handed him a piece of paper with the name, the hotel reference, and the Incheon connection she had found. 3 lines of information. She had written it on paper, not typed it, because she was not going to leave a digital trail for anyone watching to find. He read it. His face did not change. But his stillness changed, the way a room's temperature can change without anything visibly moving. When did this happen? 2 days ago. I needed time to verify the name before telling you something that might not be real. He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes that she could not name. But if she had to try, she would have called it respect, the serious kind, not the kind people perform. You verified his credentials yourself? I'm a finance student. Verifying sources is what I do before breakfast. He almost smiled. She could see him catch it. You're not afraid. I didn't say that. I'm cautious. There is a difference. He folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket. Who do you think sent him? Someone who is connected to your hotel's ownership structure and is not happy about something. I don't know what. I have the financial paper trail, but not the personal one. He was quiet for a moment. Then, his name is Han Seo-jin. He's not a journalist. I gathered that. He's someone who wants to know if I have anything close to me that he can use. He said it simply, without drama, the way people say things. They have said in their heads many times before. Zuri looked at him. She heard the word close. She heard what it was sitting next to. And does he? Does he have something? A pause that was one beat too long. Not yet, Min-jun said. Not yet. Zuri had a master's degree's worth of training in reading between the lines of financial documents. But she did not need that training for this. Not yet had one meaning. It meant, you are not a liability right now. It meant, but the situation is moving. And it meant, beneath both of those things, something he had not said out loud, but she heard anyway. I am not ready for you to be in this. She picked up her bag. I will be in your lecture on Monday. Don't cancel it. He blinked. Why would I cancel it? Because you look like a man who is about to do something that will keep him busy for the weekend. Don't let it spill into Monday. She walked out. He did not cancel the Monday lecture, but he arrived with a tension across his jaw that she recognized from the hotel corridor, from the night he had said handle it, and thought she did not understand. She understood now. He had handled something over the weekend. She did not ask what. She took her seat, opened her notebook, and wrote down everything he said. And halfway through the lecture, when he was explaining how informal economies survive by staying invisible to institutions that would absorb or destroy them, he paused and looked at the room and said, the first rule of operating in a structure that is not protected by formal systems is this. The most valuable thing you can have is someone who knows the truth about you and has chosen, with full information, to still be in the room. The class wrote it down as an academic principle. Zuri looked up from her notebook and met his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. He was not talking about economics, and they both knew it. On Wednesday, her apartment was searched. She did not know it when it happened. She was in the library, where she spent most of her Wednesday afternoons. She came home at 7 in the evening, put her keys on the hook by the door, dropped her bag, went to the kitchen to make tea. The tea bags were in the wrong drawer. That was all. Nothing broken, nothing missing, nothing dramatic. Just one drawer slightly off from where she kept things. Her notebooks on the desk were stacked with the spines facing a different direction. Her laptop was closed, which she always left open at 45 degrees when she was going out briefly. Someone had been very careful. Someone had been, in fact, professional. They had found nothing because there was nothing to find. She kept everything relevant in her head, on printed paper which she stored in the university library in a folder labeled Research Appendices, or in databases that required passwords she had not written anywhere. She sat in her kitchen and drank her tea in the wrong drawer's mug and thought carefully. This was the second contact. The yacht fake journalist had been soft, a question, a probe. This was harder. This was someone walking through her space to show they could, not to take anything, to remind her that her doors were not the walls she perhaps believed they were. She did not panic. Panic was expensive, and she could not afford it right now. She sent Min-jun one message through the university's internal messaging system, which was the only channel that felt clean. She wrote it as an academic question. Professor, I wanted to follow up on the framework we discussed in last week's session. I think someone has already worked inside that structure and left footprints. Worth discussing before Thursday. His reply came in 4 minutes. Office, 7:30 tomorrow morning. She put her phone face down and finished her tea. Then she spent 20 minutes going over every surface in her apartment and putting everything back exactly where it belonged. Not because it fixed what had happened, because she was not going to live in a space that still carried someone else's fingerprints on it, even invisible ones. She slept well. That was the detail she thought about the next morning. She had gone to sleep in an apartment that had been searched without her knowledge, and she had slept well. She did not know whether to be proud of herself or slightly worried about what that said about her. He was already in his office when she arrived. 7:28. He was standing, not sitting, which was the first difference from every other time she had seen him in that room. He had a coffee in his hand, and he looked like a man who had not started that coffee yet, because thinking had interrupted it. She told him about the apartment. 3 sentences. Just the facts, the drawer, the notebooks, the laptop angle. She did not perform upset because she was not upset. She was strategic. He put the coffee down. How do you know nothing was taken? Because I keep my sensitive material at the library and my critical information in my head. My apartment has my clothes, some instant noodles, and 300 pages of printed IMF reports that anyone is welcome to. He looked at her for a moment. You store your material off-site. My undergraduate supervisor told me in the first year that your work is only as safe as the distance you keep between it and where you sleep. I thought he was being dramatic. He was not. Min Jun looked at her with that look. The one she had started to understand meant he was recalibrating something internal. I want you to move, he said. No. Zuri. It was the first time he had used her first name. Not Miss Brownson. Not the formal corridor distance of the last several weeks. Zuri. With the same careful pronunciation she had heard in a hotel room on the second night, when he had been reading her research notes back to her from memory. She stayed very still. Using my name is not a strategy. It is not a strategy. It is a request. The answer to the request is no. I am not a package you relocate when the situation inconveniences you. She crossed her arms. I also want to point out that moving would look like movement to whoever is watching. Staying looks like I have nothing to hide, which I don't. He stared at her. That is, he said slowly, a very sound tactical argument. Thank you. I went to school for this. He almost smiled again. She was getting better at seeing it now, the slight shift at the left corner of his mouth, the quick pull of something that was trying very hard to stay controlled. It was the most human thing about him, and she suspected he did not know it showed. I'm going to handle Han Seo-jin, he said. I need a few days. All right. If anything else happens at your apartment or anywhere else, you call me directly, not the internal system, this. He wrote a number on a piece of paper and handed it to her. She took it. Is this number attached to anything traceable? No, naturally. She folded it and put it in her pocket. Handle whatever you need to handle. I have a dissertation deadline in 3 weeks, and I intend to meet it. She moved toward the door. Zuri. She stopped. I'm sorry. For the arrangement, for the way it was structured, for the fact that you did not have the full picture when you made the decision. She stood with her hand on the doorframe. She did not turn around immediately. She let the sentence land where it needed to land. I know, she said. I accept it. But I do not forget it. I wouldn't ask you to. She left, And in the corridor, walking to her first class, she felt something shift that had been sitting stiffly in her chest for several weeks. Not gone, not forgiven in the way that means erased, but moved. The way heavy furniture moves when you finally push it to a better position. Still there, just no longer blocking the door. Han Seo-jin was not a man Zuri ever saw. That was the strange part. The fake journalist had been his face in her world. But Han Seo-jin himself remained a name, a corporate connection, a shadow that she had traced through databases but never touched. She knew him the way you know a weather system, by its effects. What she understood from what Min-jun had told her, and what she had pieced together herself from the financial trail, was this. Han Seo-jin ran a competing network in Seoul. Not competing with Min-jun's academic front, competing with his real one. The one that operated through the holding companies and the hotel and the import business in Incheon, and probably 12 other structures Zuri had not found yet. Han Seo-jin wanted to know why Min-jun was at the university. A man of his position taking a faculty appointment was unusual. Unusual things meant plans. Plans meant leverage. Han Seo-jin was trying to find the leverage before the plan became clear. Zuri was the most visible thing in Min-jun's orbit. That was why they had come to her first. She sat with this understanding for a full day before she realized what it also meant. She was visible because she was close. She was close because he had made her close. Which meant if Han Seo-jin had come looking for leverage and found nothing, that was good. But if he had come looking for leverage and decided that she herself was the leverage, that was a different problem entirely. She was thinking this on a Thursday afternoon when she came out of the library and found the same man from the corridor outside room 702 standing on the pavement across the road. He was not reading a newspaper this time. He was just standing. And when she came out, he made very brief eye contact, the kind that said, "I am here and I want you to know I am here." And then he looked away. Min-jun had assigned her protection and had not told her. She recognized the work now. She stood on the library steps for a moment. Then she walked in the other direction toward a coffee shop she liked, sat in the window seat, ordered her coffee, and typed Min-jun a message on the untraceable number. She typed, "The man from the 7th floor corridor is outside my library. Tell him I take my coffee with no sugar and that he can come inside if he is cold." Min-jun's reply came in 40 seconds. "His name is Jay. He prefers tea." She almost dropped her coffee. She looked out the window. Jay was still on the pavement. She gestured once toward the door. He came inside, ordered tea without speaking because the server apparently recognized what kind of person he was, and sat 2 tables away from her with his back to the wall. She got back to her dissertation. That was, she decided, the most normal she had felt in weeks. Working in a coffee shop while a large, silent man drank tea 2 tables away and watched the door. Completely normal. The lecture that came to be known, in Zuri's private memory of this period, as the one that broke something open, happened on a Tuesday, in the 4th week. The topic on the module outline was shadow, economies, and post-colonial financial systems. Which was, and she understood the irony fully, basically the title of her dissertation. He started the lecture with a question he did not ask for answers to. Who built the systems that your family's money moves through? And who decided that those systems would be considered legitimate, while the ones your grandparents used before, that were not? The room was quiet in a different way than usual. This was not comfortable, academic quiet. This was the quiet of a room where people were suddenly thinking about something they had not expected to think about today. He talked about the mechanics of it, how colonial economies had deliberately undermined local exchange systems, how the replacement systems had been designed to extract rather than circulate, how the informal networks that economists called unofficial were often the original systems that had been renamed rather than replaced. Then he said something that made Zuri's pen stop for the second time in her memory of his lectures. "I have operated inside these systems," he said. "Not as a researcher. Directly. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that what you are studying is not theoretical. The gap between the economy you can see and the one that actually moves money is not an academic abstraction. It is where real people make real decisions with real consequences. Some of those decisions look wrong from the outside and are necessary from the inside. Some of them look necessary from the inside and are simply wrong. Learning to know the difference is harder than any model you will find in this module's reading list." Nobody moved. A student in the front row finally raised his hand. "Professor, when you say you operated inside these systems, can you elaborate on that?" "No," Minjun said pleasantly, "but your dissertation can. That's the point." Light laughter moved through the room. Zuri did not laugh. She was looking at him and thinking about a man sitting in a hotel armchair reading a book with practiced stillness. A man who said, "Handle it," and paid 11 million won in 14 minutes. A man whose hotel had security on a non-existent floor, and whose corporate trail disappeared into organizations that academic papers described carefully and only by category. And she was thinking about what she had always believed about people who operated in those systems. That they were calculating. That they were primarily self-interested. That the human cost of what they did was something they had learned to set aside. And she was also thinking about how this man, who fit every part of that description on paper, had read her dissertation abstract and found it worth protecting. Had called her scholarship reinstatement before they had exchanged a single word, had sat across from her for 3 nights and engaged her like a person whose ideas were worth taking seriously, at a moment when most of the world was treating her like a problem, to be managed. She did not know what to do with that. She was not sure she was ready to do anything with it yet. After the lecture, she stayed in her seat while the room emptied. He was at the board, erasing his notes. When the last student left, he turned. "You had a question," he said. "I had about 11 questions," she said. He pulled out the chair at the empty desk closest to the front and sat in it, which surprised her because it put him in the room as a student rather than a professor, and she got the feeling he had done that deliberately. "Ask one," he said. She chose carefully. Out of all 11, she picked the one she had been storing the longest. "Why did you come to the university?" Really, not the explanation that goes in a faculty announcement. The real one. He looked at her for a long moment. The room was empty, and the overhead lights in lecture halls are always slightly too bright. And in that light, he looked for the first time like someone who had been doing something exhausting for a very long time. "I have been building something for 15 years, he said. "Something that is supposed to eventually look like a legitimate institution. A real one, not a cover. I came to the university because I want to understand whether what I have been building has any chance of becoming what I intended, or whether the foundation is too far gone to build on." She absorbed that. "You're trying to go legitimate." "I am trying to understand if I can. There is a difference. And the people who work inside your structure, the ones who have built careers in the not visible parts, do they know this is the plan? Some of them. Most of them don't want it to change. Change threatens what they have. And Han Seo-jin is what I looked like 10 years ago. before I started asking the question you just asked me. He thinks I'm building something against him. He can't understand that I'm building something away from all of it, including him. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Your third chapter problem is not structural. It's foundational. You can't build a legitimate institution on top of an illegitimate one without dismantling the bottom first. Which means the people who live at the bottom have to have somewhere else to go. Do you have somewhere else for them to go?" He stared at her. "You just described my entire problem in 4 sentences. I know, because I wrote about it in my dissertation, which you read before you ever spoke to me." A pause. "Yes. So, when you found my abstract and decided I was someone worth watching, it was not just because my argument was good. No. It was because my argument was the question you were already trying to answer." "Yes," he said. Very quietly, like a man admitting something he had not fully admitted to himself yet. The lights in the lecture hall hummed. Someone walked past the door outside in the corridor. The university went on around them, completely indifferent. "You should have just talked to me," she said. Not with anger. More like the sadness that comes when you see a complicated route taken where a simple road existed. "I know that now. Why didn't you?" He thought about that for longer than any of his other answers. "Because I am very good at a certain kind of engagement and very bad at a different kind. The kind that requires simply showing up and saying, 'I think you have something I need to understand.' And I don't know how to get there from where I am. That kind." Zuri looked at him. This was, she thought, the most honest thing he had ever said to her. More honest than the yes in the seminar room. More honest than the apology at the door. This was the kind of honesty that people only arrive at when they have run out of better options and decided the truth is the last available tool. "You're doing it now," she said. He looked at her. "You just showed up and said it," she said. "You are currently doing the thing you said you were bad at." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think you make it easier." She picked up her bag. "I have a dissertation to finish, and you have, apparently, a 15-year project to complete. So, he agreed. She walked out. In the corridor, she slowed to her normal pace and allowed herself one private smile that she immediately packed away where nobody could see it. Han Seo-jin was resolved on a Saturday. Zuri did not know how. She did not ask. What she saw was the effect of it on Monday morning, when Min Jun walked into the lecture hall looking like someone who had crossed a difficult border and arrived on the other side heavier than he had started. He taught the full lecture. He answered every question. He was present and clear and excellent, the way he always was. But at the end, when the class had filed out, and only Zuri remained, she stayed in her seat and said nothing. She let the silence sit. She had learned from watching him that silence was something you could offer to a person the way you offer a chair or a cup of tea. She let him have it. After a moment, he said, "It's done." "Good. There may be other things. I don't want to pretend this is the last of it. I did not assume it was." He looked at her. "You are remarkably undisturbed by all of this." "I grew up in Abuja. I did my undergraduate degree in Lagos. I know how cities with invisible layers work. I have always known. I just never expected to be inside one of them. And now that you are?" She considered. "Now that I am, I want to understand it properly, which is either very useful or very stupid depending on how things go. It could be both. Most things worth doing are." He almost smiled. This time, she saw it fully. It was not a large smile, It was the kind of smile that belongs to people who have forgotten how to use one regularly and are remembering it one small piece at a time. She stood. I have my dissertation submission in 8 days. I will be in the library for most of them. Don't cancel any lectures. I need the module credit. I won't. And tell Jay he can wait outside the library. He does not need to sit in the cold. The building is open until 11. Min-jun looked at her for a moment with an expression she had not seen on him before. Warm, but the contained kind, like warmth in a lantern rather than an open fire. I'll tell him. She submitted her dissertation on a Friday morning at 8:57. She had been in the library since 5:30. She had printed the final copy twice because the first one had a margin error on page 43 that she noticed at 5:48 and could not in good conscience submit. She had bound it herself with the plastic comb binder the library kept behind the front desk for students who asked nicely. She walked it to the faculty office, handed it to the administrator, said thank you, and turned around and stood outside on the faculty steps in the early Seoul morning. It was cold. The kind of cold that arrives in Seoul in the late semester, the sort that does not ask permission. She had a scarf, but she had left it in the library, and she did not go back for it. She called her mother. Her mother picked up on the second ring, which meant she had been awake. She was probably in the kitchen. She was always in the kitchen in the mornings. Zuri? I submitted, Mummy. A sound came through the phone that was not quite a word, the kind of sound that exists only between a mother and a child who has just done something that cost everything. Zuri stood on the cold steps of the faculty building in Seoul and held her phone and let her mother be proud of her. She did not tell her about the letter or the bank or room 702 or the man who had read her dissertation abstract from 4,000 miles away and decided it was worth protecting. She did not tell her about Jay and his tea or the fake journalist or the drawer with the tea bags in the wrong position. She said, "The third chapter is really good, Mummy. I think the committee is going to argue about it." "Good," her mother said firmly. "Let them argue. You make them think." She smiled. "Yes, Mummy." 3 weeks later, a research position opened in Seoul. It was with an independent economic policy institute. Post-graduation, 1-year fellowship. The research focus was informal capital systems and development financing in sub-Saharan African markets. Competitive salary, full visa support, and access to a database of primary field research that her university did not have. She saw the listing in the graduate office email. She read it twice. Then she forwarded it to herself with no note. She did not check whether the institute had any connection to Min-jun's legitimate corporate fronts. She thought about checking. She decided not to. Not because she was afraid of what she would find, but because she had decided that she was applying for this position, because it was the right position, and whatever she found in the ownership trail would not change that. Her reasons were her own. She would not let his presence in her orbit become a reason to doubt her own decisions. She applied. She got a call 2 weeks after her dissertation results came in. Her committee had passed her with distinction. The third chapter, her supervisor noted in his written feedback, showed unusual field familiarity for a student without direct industry experience. She had laughed at that alone in her apartment for a full minute. The fellowship interview was on a Tuesday afternoon. She went. She talked for 40 minutes about her research, about her argument, about what she believed was possible in African development finance if the right frameworks were applied without the usual condescension of international institutions. The panel listened the way you listen when you have already made a decision. But you want to hear the person say it out loud. She got the offer 3 days later. She called her mother. She did not tell her the salary in won because her mother would convert it to naira, and then she would have to explain why Zuri was not coming home immediately. "One more year, Mummy," she said. "I have something important to finish here." Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, "Zuri, is there a man?" Zuri sat down on her bed. "Mummy, I am your mother. I know the voice you are using right now. It is not a dissertation voice. There is something else in it." Zuri looked at her ceiling. "It's complicated. Everything worth having is complicated. Is he good?" Zuri thought about that. Really thought about it, with the same care she brought to everything else that mattered. "He is trying to be," she said. "I think that counts." Her mother made a sound that meant, "I will need more information eventually, but I accept this for now. Come home at Christmas." "Yes, Mummy." She saw Minjun the day she accepted the fellowship, not by arrangement. She was walking across the university's east courtyard at 4 in the afternoon, and he was coming from the direction of the administration building, alone, coat on, moving with the particular kind of purpose that said he had just finished something and had not yet decided what to start next. They both stopped. It was not a dramatic stop. Just two people who saw each other and understood there was no performance required in this particular moment. "I accepted the fellowship," she said. He looked at her. "Which one?" "The Policy Institute. Post-graduation research. 1 year." A pause. "I know that institute." "I know you know that institute," she said evenly. He looked at her steadily. "I did not arrange for that position to be listed." "I know," she said. "I checked." "Eventually?" "You checked." "I am a finance student who has been in Seoul for 2 years, Professor. Of course I checked. And then I accepted it anyway because it was the right position regardless. I am telling you this so we are both clear that I stayed for my own reasons." He was quiet for a moment. The courtyard moved around them. Students crossing, wind moving through the trees at the east wall. "Understood," he said. "Good." She adjusted her bag on her shoulder. "You still owe me the answer you said you weren't ready to give. About why you needed to know the person behind the academic record." He looked at her with the expression she had come to think of as his real one. The one underneath the controlled professor and the calculated businessman and the careful negotiator. The one that said, "I am a person who is not entirely sure how to be a person, but I am trying. I think," he said carefully, "that I was looking for someone who understood the argument I was trying to make before I had found the language for it. And I found it in a dissertation abstract written by a 24-year-old finance student from Nigeria who had never met me and had no reason to be right about any of it, and yet was right about all of it." Zuri looked at him. "That is either the most roundabout way anyone has ever told me they found me interesting," she said, "or it is a genuinely important confession about what you have been trying to build. I am not certain which." "Both," he said. Again. She shook her head slowly, but she was not unhappy about it. "I start at the Institute in January. Until then, I am going home for Christmas, and I am going to eat my mother's food and not think about informal capital systems for 2 weeks." "That sounds good." "It will be." She started walking. Then she stopped and turned back once. "Thank you for what you said in the lecture about learning to know the difference between necessary and simply wrong. I put it in the dedication of my dissertation." He looked at her with something she could not fully name because it had too many things in it. Surprise. Something older than surprise. Something that had been waiting in him for a long time to find a place to land. "You put it in the dedication. Not with your name, just the words. My committee will think it is from a book." "And what do you think it is from?" She looked at him across the courtyard, with winter coming in off the Seoul streets and the university going on around them like it always had, indifferent to everything that had happened inside its walls. "A conversation I will finish properly," she said, "when both of us are ready." She turned and walked. She did not look back a second time. She did not need to. She knew he was still standing there. She knew because in 4 months she had learned one thing about Cha Min-jun that was more true than anything she had found in any database or corporate filing or academic profile. When he decided something was worth watching, he did not look away. And some agreements, she had decided, were only the beginning. If this story got you, leave a comment right now. Tell me which scene broke you. Was it the lecture hall reveal? The scholarship paper? The seminar room? The courtyard? I want to know. And if you watch this story and you are still not subscribed, what are you waiting for? There are more stories like this one coming. Different worlds, different people, the same thing underneath it all. 2 people finding each other in the most complicated way possible and choosing to stay anyway. Subscribe, comment, share this with a friend who reads romance novels in secret and pretends they don't. I will see you in the next story.